Health problems that are linked to nutrition in some fashion are the most serious threat to public health in the U.S. There are 280,000 deaths per year in America attributed to obesity. There are more than 64 million Americans that have one or more type of cardiovascular disease, making cardiovascular disease the leading cause of death in the U.S., almost 40% of all deaths. Cancer is the second leading cause of death, and a third of cancer deaths can somehow be attributed to nutrition as well. Alright, now what's causing all these issues? There's obviously something wrong here. Well, there's a lot of factors, countless actually, I couldn't name them all. But one of the big ones that I'm going to focus on is grains. Now, grains are largely made of carbs, and carbs break down into glucose, which is what's used by your body to produce ATP. Therefore, your body must take carbs and put them into glucose if it actually wants to use it for some sort of energy. When glucose levels raise in the bloodstream, the pancreas releases insulin in order to stabilize these levels. That's a normal homeostatic mechanism. It's something that we do every single day. Now, insulin, it helps muscle, fat, and liver cells actually absorb glucose from the bloodstream. It also stimulates liver and muscle tissue to store excess glucose. Finally, insulin actually reduces glucose production in the liver. And this actually can lead to a more serious health risk called insulin resistance. With insulin resistance, the body produces insulin but does not use it effectively. Therefore, the body must use more and more insulin in order to absorb glucose. Glucose slowly builds up into the bloodstream, and eventually the pancreas cells are working so hard that they fail and die, thus continuing the vicious cycle of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance directly causes type 2 diabetes, which 11 million Americans have right now. Insulin resistance also causes obesity, coronary heart disease, and high blood pressure. And 50 million Americans have high blood pressure right now. So how do we measure which foods may lead to insulin resistance? Well, the glycemic index compares the blood glucose raising potential of different foods. However, this isn't very precise because different foods have different serving sizes and different densities of nutrients. Therefore, we can use glycemic load, which takes the glycemic index and then compares it to the carbohydrate content per serving size of each food. It's a pretty general trend that grain and sugar products have much higher glycemic loads than unprocessed fruits and vegetables. So, the glycemic load goes on a scale from 0 to 100, and I'm going to throw a few examples at you. Rice Krispies and jelly beans are at 72. Table sugar is at 65. Shredded wheat is at 62. White bread is all the way down at 34, not bad. Whole wheat bread is at 32. Baked potatoes are at 21 with all their carbs. Bananas have 12, grapes have 8, and then carrots have 5. So basically what we're seeing is that sugars with a high glycemic load supply 18.6% of American energy, while refined grains supply 20.4% of American energy. Therefore, in America, 39% of our energy is supplied by foods that highly promote insulin resistance. No wonder we're having so many issues. But we all need carbs. Carbs are good to eat and they provide good fuel. However, we can get the same amount of carbs from fruits or vegetables that have way more vitamins and nutrients in it, so they're much healthier for us, but they have a much lower glycemic load. Okay, so to illustrate this a little bit more, let's take a look at the indigenous people of Australia, known as Aboriginals. Now, the indigenous Aboriginals of Australia were known to be fit, healthy, and strong. They basically were the hunter-gatherer society. The men would go out, they would hunt, the women would gather, they would come together at night, and they would basically make a big dinner, they would eat fish, and everything that they ate came from the land around them. Their diet was very high in protein, and it was high in complex carbohydrates, and very high in overall nutrients, but it was very low in sugars, and there was obviously no processed foods. Well, in 1788, Europeans inhabited Australia. The indigenous lands were taken over by farmers, and the indigenous people basically had to work for the farmers because their land was taken. And they actually weren't always paid in money. Usually they were paid in food, sometimes they were given shelter. So they really had no option but to eat the Western diet that was given for them for their work. So the Aboriginals adopted a Western diet, and then what happened? Well, today, 28% of indigenous people are classified as overweight, and 29% of indigenous people are classified as obese. That means that 57% of the population is either overweight or obese, which is pretty close to America at 65%.